John, I'm disappointed in you, man. Do you know what today is?
Today is the anniversary of the best game ever.
But you didn't seem to know this, though, a few hours ago. And
It's a surprise party.
I don't think that would fly in Resident Evil 4 with your spouse, and she'd be like, hey, where were you on my birthday? Why weren't you celebrating until 7 p.m. my time, or local time? To be fair, though, this isn't the 15th anniversary in Europe. It's only the 15th anniversary in North America. But yeah, once I heard about this, I'm like, we have to discuss this. Resident Evil 4, as you just said, John, is one of the best games ever made, and this is a pretty big anniversary. I don't think we can, I didn't think it'd be right to let this go by without us discussing this fantastic game in some way. Even if we've already had, a review and an hour-long stream of the Switch version, really not all that long ago. So, I want to talk about why this game is so good, and why it's held up all this time. So, John, let's go ahead and let you start things off here. What makes Resident Evil 4 so great?
Resident Evil 4 is designed around its limitations, so even though some of the controls are perhaps a bit... I'm not going to use the word dated, but perhaps a bit different to shooters today, every single element of the game's design works around that, so it will never age. I see threads out there on forums with people saying the game has bad controls. Those people are wrong.
No, they are the ones that are broken, not the game.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's just the core reason why this game is so good, because the core design just works with the limitations they put in store. And because the pacing's perfect. Like, it starts off immediately, and like right off the bat you're right in the game, and the action just never really stops. It's just such a well-paced game, and mechanically, it's one of the very best games I've ever played.
How about you, Derek? Why is John right?
I mean, basically for all the reasons he just said, but it also works because of how much it pushed the Resident Evil series forward. Like, going from the last release game, which was Code Veronica, to this, or maybe did the GameCube remakes come out before this? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Okay, but even looking at those to this is a massive upgrade. The inventory system, the save system, the control of the game, it all works so well. And yeah, it's more action focused, but it's still just a ton of fun, and the ways that you can interact with the Ganados,
or AKA not zombies.
Yeah, exactly. The not zombies. Shoot him in the leg, shoot him in the hand to make him drop the weapon, shoot him in the head. But even that gets turned on its, head by the end of the game with how they will mess with you, and that headshots might not be the best idea.
Yeah.
It's just so well done as a sequel that pushes the series forward, and I think paved the way for all the different interpretations of Resident Evil we've gotten since then.
For better or worse.
Yeah.
No, it really can't be understated how much Resident Evil 4 not only did for the Resident Evil series, but also just kind of gaming in general. Like, we've heard from so many developers since then. I mean, not even just heard, it's clear through their gameplay that they were obviously inspired by Resident Evil 4. Gears of War was largely, based on Resident Evil 4, from the camera perspective and the over-the-shoulder, the over-the-shoulder gunplay. So Resident Evil 4 did so much for gaming at its time, and and not just because it did something new, it's because it freaking killed it. It nailed almost every facet that it attempted. And the crazy thing is, though, is this wasn't. It was almost, I don't want to say accidental, but it definitely wasn't accidental, but it took a lot of work to get there, because this game was originally planned to come out on the PS2 in 2001, and of course it wouldn't come out until 2005 on the GameCube. And in that time, a little known fact by the way, Resident Evil 4 isn't called Resident Evil 4 because it's the fourth main series installment. It's because it went through 4 different installments to get to the one it is. Actually, it might be even 5, but point is, this game was reinvented so many times. It switched directors until they finally arrived at the gameplay concept that ultimately is the one they ended up going with, and that's that involved the shift in the camera perspective, the shift in the gameplay, the tonal shift, the gameplay shift into being more of an action game or more of an action focus, and of course the fact that there aren't even zombies here. This is a Resident Evil game without true zombies. How wild is that? And the really crazy thing to me, real quick, is the fact that the reason they invented Resident Evil is because the director, Shinji Mikami, felt like Resident Evil was feeling a little long in the tooth. He wanted to reinvent it. Now keep in mind, by the point Resident Evil 4 actually came out, that was only 8 years compared, since the first one. Whereas now it's been almost double that since Resident Evil 4. That's just crazy to me. Stupid time, I hate time.
He's right though. I mean, the core Resident Evil games had 5 entries. There was 1, 2, 3, Code Veronica, and 0. And the formula was fine, but it clearly needed a shake-up. We've been going for a while without a drastic change in tone. And 4 was just such a huge change. It was such a huge departure from anything that came before. The previous games had pre-rendered backgrounds and tank controls and had a focus on horror. And 4 had none of that. Like, 4 was all about the action and the tone rather than the actual, horror vibes, I'd say. And just the general gameplay had such a different loop to the core, to the games that came before.
It felt incredibly different. I actually played this game. So I was at both E3s when Resident Evil 4 appeared. I was at, I believe it was 2003 when they showed off the Hookman version, which I believe was version 3, if I'm remembering correctly, before they completely reinvented it for its debut. I believe the following year with a gameplay demo at E3. And this is the one that this is where the game started to blow minds, I think. I remember playing this demo. It was a village portion of the game, and it felt crazy to me how different and fresh and good it just felt in general. It almost felt like, obviously it's not an open world game, but it almost felt like that when you're going from the very small fixed corridors of previous Resident Evils to this relatively large section that you can run around in freely, including climbing ladders, kicking them down, jumping through windows. You have free aiming control. You can look and aim at enemies however you want. This is something we had not seen in Resident Evil, and largely in gaming to that point, and it just felt so fresh and new. And I couldn't wait to actually play the game when it fully came out, which is something I hadn't experienced before with Resident Evil. I played Resident Evil 2 on the 64, and I thought it was fine, but it never hooked me like Resident Evil 4 did.
I totally know what you mean, but I love how you say that this one feels more open-ended, when the ones that came before it were more about backtracking and being in this one world. But 4 does a great job of establishing itself as something bigger. There's a point in the village where you're on those lifts, and in the distance you can see the castle from the village. The world just feels so contextually put together. And even though you are going through these sort of linear levels, everything still feels fully connected. And at any point you can turn back and just go all the way back to where you came before.
And that's the crazy thing about this game, is how ridiculous it gets, but it never feels like, in the moment, what am I doing here? How did I end up in this place? It's like, no, I'm in a village. Alright, now I'm in the countryside. Oh, now there's a castle. Okay, we're dealing with the castle stuff. Oh, we're out of the castle. Now we're going to this other island where it's a military base. Sure, why not? And it never feels like, what am I doing here? If you take a step back and look at all that, it becomes kind of ridiculous, but in the moment, it works perfectly. And the way they change up the enemies and the situations and what you have to do and just how crazy this game gets, the people that Leon has to interact with as he goes along, it really pulls you in. The first time I played this back in college when it first came out, I beat it in 2 days. I had 2 pretty long sections, and it's what, a 10 to 15 hour game?
No, it's like a 20-hour game at least.
It's a pretty beefy game.
Yeah, so yeah, I was there 2 days, beat it in one sit in those sittings, and that's all I did that weekend, and one of the best weekends of my life.
As it should be. I mean, I actually feel bad for you because you'll never have a weekend that lives up to that again. It's all downhill from that weekend. No, I mean, you're right. This game is constantly pushing you into new areas, new environments. Even within the same environments, it's constantly switching things up on a room-to-room basis. The variety of gameplay here, I think, is unprecedented when it comes to a third-person shooter. It's just wild. And I think part of the reason why it works, Derek, I mean, beyond just the constant change in pace and setting, is just the overall tone of the game, which I think John commented on earlier too, where some of the previous Resident Evil games, particularly the first one, it had that kind of B-movie vibe, but unintentionally so. It just kind of ended up that way. Whereas Resident Evil 4, I think very purposefully captured that. They intentionally leaned into that, and it works. You encounter these weird villains, it was Salazar, who was such a weird but gripping presence throughout much of the adventure. Then you have what's the little guy again? The
I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah, okay, you know who I mean. There's just this wide variety of characters, and it all works. Like the script is intentionally cheesy, and it's just perfect. And this, by the way, has by far the definitive version of Leon. And I don't know why they can't nail it. Why they can't get it. Why they can't recapture the magic. They ruined his face, they ruined his personality. I want Leon back. Bring back the Leon we all know and love from Resident Evil 4.
It's so quotable too. I can't remember the little guy's name, but all I remember is he just goes like, Mr. Kennedy. You got Leon going like, where's everyone going? Bingo? There's just so many great lines in this game. It's fully because they're intentionally trying to be cheesy, and it pays off so well. Still
some, like, even though it leans into the action, I still think there's some pretty scary moments, like the maze with all the dogs.
No, Derek, this game is not scary at all and ruined the horror genre forever.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize. I'm sorry.
That's what people claim. That's what hardcore Resident Evil fans claim.
I remember my first time going into the village onslaught, and I was terrified. My very first time doing that. Yeah. I think we become more comfortable with the game the more we play through it. But that very first time, there are moments of genuine fear. I've never felt so hunted in a game before that moment.
I'm actually perplexed by people who don't find this game scary, because I found this game terrifying my first time through. Whether it's the zombie dogs and in the maze, as you mentioned, Derek, the knights chasing you down the hallway, the regenerators, which might have the scariest sound design of any enemy ever.
Yeah.
The little guy's right-hand man in the sewers, that was terrifying.
I know I've told the story before, and it's possible it's been distorted over time, because I've never heard anyone else encounter this, so maybe it's just me. Or maybe I have distorted what actually happened, but to my memory, I remember like trying to outrun that guy who was terrifying. He's chasing you, like he's coming at you through the ceiling. He drops down occasionally. I remember I made it to the elevator once it finally arrived, and just as I was boarding it, he was already there waiting for me. He just instantly killed me, and I'm like, I can't deal with this right now. This is too much. Like, I almost had a heart attack from that.
And then you have the ridiculous moments I think people claim where the horror is gone, when the giant statue is chasing after Leon in the castle.
It can get absurd, but I think that's still fine though. The game has fun with itself, and I think it speaks to it that it can get cheesy, it can get over the top, but it can still like give you that genuine feeling of fear though.
Right. I think it all works because of the general tone of the game. It doesn't take itself too seriously, but it takes itself seriously enough when it needs to. And it's for that reason, like, that I think the fear is legit. Like, it definitely feels tense too. Like, it's not just scary, but it's incredibly tense. I think part of that is comes down to the genius of the non-real-time inventory system. I've seen some people complain like it feels dated. Like, I wish you could switch in real time. I'm like, no. You need that, like, that sense of dread as you go in your inventory to figure out how you're going to deal with these enemies. Because you know, as soon as you exit out of that screen, they're still there waiting for you. They didn't walk off. They're waiting for you, and I love that. And I love that it almost adds like a real-time puzzle-solving mechanic. It's like, what can I do? What do I have on me that is most effective against these enemies? Do I want to use a flash grenade? Do I want to use my shotgun that I have like maybe 2 bullets for, or do I want to save those for later? I just love like this energy that no other game for me has quite captured to the same degree.
Resident Evil 5 went on to have this grid-based inventory. We can basically have like, I think 6 or 7 items on your inventory at a time, and it doesn't matter what gun you have, it's going to fit in that slot. Whereas Resident Evil 4, you have to properly maneuver your guns around and make sure they fit in your box, and it can drastically impact what you take with you. Like, there might be a gun that you're really attached to, but you're going to have to sell it because there's a better gun coming along, and your previous gun would just not fit in your selection. So I loved just like moving things around, trying to get everything to fit, trying to make the best use out of your inventory.
There is a certain brilliance to having stronger, in general, the stronger weapons consuming more space in your inventory. So yeah, you can hold on to the rocket launcher if you want, but that's going to give you one shot, and it'll be a very powerful shot. But if you screw it up, you've been burning that inventory space for however long you carried it. So.
I also like how they just give you more options. Like, I've never seen a knife more useful than in Resident Evil 4. The way you can shoot them, have them double over, do the roundhouse kick to put them on the ground, and then just start slicing them until they get up, and then repeat the process if you didn't take them out. Like, that is really satisfying to figure out that gameplay loops, figure out the best ways to take these enemies down very quickly so you can figure out what it is, it makes the game so replayable.
One of the very first Game Explain videos we ever posted before YouTube even existed, that's right, Game Explain was around before YouTube, was defeating Krauser by using only the knife.
It's the best way to do it.
Yeah. I like to think we invented that technique, John. we started it.
Some of the most punchy guns in the entire industry, though, like just the reload animations alone look so good. Like reloading that rifle, nothing's come close to that. And just the amount of power all these weapons have, it's easy to become attached to something. I remember on my first playthrough, I kept the TMP, which is one of the earliest guns. I kept that with me the entire time, just upgrading it. I became really attached to this gun, and it stayed with me until the very end, and that's basically the primary weapon that I used. But on another playthrough, I might go through with the shotgun or the riot gun, and all of them have reason to be chosen, because they all just feel so good, and they all have their own purpose.
You know what else I love too is the guns feel good. They feel powerful, or they feel powerful when they need to, like when there's a powerful gun, like you feel that impact. And as part of this too, this game to me has the best upgrade system I've experienced in any action game. Most of the time, maybe it's just me, but most of the time when I upgrade a weapon in the game, I can't even tell. It's like, yeah, I'm doing it because I have the cash, and it says it's 0.2%, you know, or 2% stronger, or however percent stronger. But it never felt impactful to me. Here, I feel like you immediately notice the upgrade potential of each gun, and I would spend like 20 minutes sometimes trying to debate like what do I want to upgrade? How am I going to invest my money into these weapons? Like, where am I going to feel the greatest benefit? Whereas in most games, I'm like, yeah, it's just XXX, sure, I'll take it, whatever, I don't care.
With the standard handgun, it starts off pretty weak, but if you upgrade it a bit, that's going to become as good as some later guns in the game. Yeah, as you say, you can feel each upgrade going along. And some guns have pretty limited ammo, like the Broken Butterfly, for instance, is a very powerful gun, but I think it holds like 6 shots, and Magnum ammo is pretty hard to come by. But, like, yeah, it totally is worth upgrading all these weapons, because there's a tangible effect. And then you think, like, should I upgrade this weapon, or buy a brand new one? Because sometimes it can be pretty pricey to do that. So just, like, money management is a big part of your thought process going around.
It is.
Well, not even money management, but treasure management, because they'll give you, like, crowns or specific pieces of treasure, and you can sell them right away, but you can also save them until you get these special jewels that you can pop in them that makes them worth even more. So it teaches you patience and really exploring to find all those special jewels in order to just get the most out of each thing that you sell. And I found that way more gratifying than just selling it right off the bat. Like, it was nice to have that immediate push, but building up toward those special crowns or what have you in order to sell that and have all of a sudden enough to buy the next weapon or upgrades to something I've wanted for a while felt really good.
You're kind of touching on a larger point there too, is the method in which you find all these jewels and treasure. Like, they're not just given to you oftentimes, sometimes they are, but often you have to go out of your way to find them, like shooting birds' nests to drop some of these emeralds or jewels, or going out of your way to find this treasure. And so much of the world felt interactive, like breaking open boxes or barrels to find stuff inside them. And that made it fun too, like that you are constantly wanting to explore these relatively big open environments to try and find everything you can.
They encourage it quite a lot too with the core puzzle design. There's one moment in the castle where to progress, you have to find a painting and then shoot a glass of wine in that painting. I just love that part, because then it gets you even more curious the rest of the game. Like, do other puzzles work like that? Should I be shooting everything I come across? And there's one great moment in the village where I think it's where the ogre arena is, but basically before you fight the giant El Gigante, there's some birds just lying around, and if you throw a flash grenade, you can just get all of them at once, and they just drop so much treasure.
So great.
Yeah, so many great secrets to find. And well, even speaking of the ogre, God, this game has some good boss fights.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I think every single one of them is memorable.
Yeah. Is it El Gigante, or however you pronounce it?
El Gigante, the thing in the lake, the fight against the village leader.
I'm usually not a fan of games just sort of copy and pasting their boss fights again, but there's one point in the game where you fight 2 El Gigantes in this giant lava arena, and the context behind how they place these enemies in there again makes it worth it. Like, it feels great taking on 2 at once, but it also feels great like sinking one of them in the lava pit. It's just a great thing to pull off, and I never felt like they were sort of reusing content, because it felt good to fight these guys again.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And El Gigante, I think, is probably one of the more compelling bosses in the game, which is really saying something. So I remember my first encounter with him, and it is just terrifying. Like, you're just a small little dude taking on this behemoth. And what I loved about it is how interactive, again, it felt. Because this guy, he wasn't just like walking around slamming things. Like, he would like pick up trees and chuck them at you. He would throw boulders at you. If you went into a house to look for treasure or things to help you out, he would lift off the roof of the house and then beat on you. And then perhaps one of the coolest things about this game, just in a small touch kind of a way, there's a dog earlier on that if you rescue, he'll pop up about halfway through the battle and will help you distract. And will help distract El Gigante so you can finally, shoot at him without having to worry about him chasing you down constantly.
So good, yeah.
It's so great, yeah.
I quite often hear people say that the village portion is the best part of the game, and that it goes downhill from there on. I don't agree with that, and I think a lot of people see the village as the best part of the game because it's just such a strong first impression. We did an Under the Super Scope on this game, and it's one of the very first episodes of that series. And we basically compare it to Mario 1-1, where it's just so iterative with its enemy design and teaching you the core mechanics, and then just throws you in the deep end with that onslaught at the end. And I think we just have such strong memories of that segment that maybe the rest of the game doesn't live up to that. But play through it again. Every single part of this game is just continuously good. And as we're touching on earlier, it constantly reinvents itself with new enemy types, new layouts, new environments. It's just always throwing something new at you, and I don't think this would be the same game if you just stayed in the village the entire time. I love how much variety there is to this game.
I completely forgot about the underground portion with the ruins and the minecart and dealing with enemies there. It really is just, each section is so memorable and fun and has its own unique flavor to it, like fighting knights in the castle and then getting to the Gatling gun wielding enemies by the military base and taking cover and doing all that. Your poor helicopter pilot getting taken down, you don't know for very long, but dang it, that was my ride.
It's so replayable as well. Like, you can just play through this game anytime, any day of the week, and it's still fun. Because there's never really any low moments. You can skip the cutscenes and just keep playing the game, and it's just moment-to-moment gameplay. There's never any moment where you're following an NPC around because you have to. It's always interactive.
You know how replayable it is, John? This is the only game my dad played for 10 years. Literally the only game he played pretty much every day for 10 years. He was obsessed with Resident Evil 4, which is something I only broke when I got on my Switch and Breath of the Wild, which he then became obsessed with. But yeah, he loved Resident Evil 4, and I think part of that too is, beyond just the gameplay, this game felt cinematic in a way I don't think we'd seen much, and certainly not to that degree as in Resident Evil 4. Like, it almost... I feel like it was almost like an earlier version of, or almost like a first stab at the kind of style Uncharted would go for, in a slightly different direction, obviously. But this game felt cinematic. Like, it felt, I think it being a horror-ish game kind of helped contribute to that, because that gets you emotionally aroused during the game. But I think, just the visual presentation in general, really helped sell everything about it. Whether it was the cutscenes or just the graphics and detail in general, which were amazing for their time. I felt like it would still hold its own in 480p up against the Xbox that came out the following year, or Xbox 360. It looked great for years to come.
It still does. I can still look at this game and think it looks really good. In my opinion, Capcom's HD version is kind of a step down. I feel like the original had such a great color palette, and just the atmosphere just felt stronger to me than the cleaner HD version. But there is a fan project which has basically gone and redone the entire textures while being loyal to the original art style, and it looks amazing.
Yeah, that does look really good. And what's really cool is I don't think I've seen a fan project belabor the point of trying to stay true to the original game as much as possible. Like, these guys, whenever possible, are going back to the original source of the textures, which includes taking pictures of real-life things that exist, which the original development team did to get these textures in the first place. So I think it's awesome what they're doing, that they're trying to stay as faithful as possible to the original game, and only changing it when they really have to. But yeah, looking at it, it looks like a professionally done version of the game, and they're still working on it, but I think they're getting close to the end game now. And I would love if Capcom, if they don't end up doing their own, they should just maybe offer to adopt these guys to help with, or just I don't know, pay them to take their work and re-release it officially. It looks so good, and I'm actually shocked that Capcom hasn't really done a proper update to this game yet. I mean, as you said, it still like holds up pretty well in HD as is, but they could go farther and actually really make this like, you know, look current and modern.
And I think that's part of my fear, is they're going to get around to properly remaking this game. Like we've had Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 3 is coming in 3 months. I don't know if 4 needs a remake.
No, because here's the thing: what Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 are doing, they're fundamentally changing the game. It's using the same story and, you know, basic idea, but they're fundamentally different games. And Resident Evil 4 holds up because it's a fundamentally fantastic game. So to reimagine it, it could still be a great game, but it wouldn't be Resident Evil 4.
Exactly. And like Resident Evil 4 is kind of arcadey in its nature. Like you can get infinity frames by jumping off a ladder at the right time or doing a roundhouse kick at the right time. You can, like, your gun's always going to reload no matter how many shells you put in. Like your animation shows you putting 2 shells in a shotgun, but no matter how much ammo you have, it's going to get fully reloaded. And I think you'd lose that if you went for a more realistic approach. And part of the reason this game still holds up is because the enemies are limited with you. Like, you can't walk and shoot, and they're aware of that, so they hobble towards you when they're close and run in the distance. If you remake Resident Evil 4, you're losing the core identity of it, in my opinion. Like, they could remake it and be loyal, but then I don't think that's what they'll do, though.
Yeah, because if they remade it, there's no way that they wouldn't make it so you can move and shoot at the same time. And that alone would fundamentally change the game. The game is all about positioning. It's about finding a location to kind of hunker down in for a little bit and target enemies before you're forced to relocate elsewhere. And giving you the ability, giving you the freedom to move and shoot at the same time sounds good on paper, but that fundamentally changes this game to such a degree that it's effectively an entirely different experience.
Shooting's a risk. Like, just taking the time to stop moving and shoot, that is part of the fear. That's part of the horror of this game.
Oh yeah, especially when dealing with the chainsaw guys right away.
Yeah.
And it kind of grounds the experience, both literally and figuratively, because people don't really run and shoot in real life either. You're not going to hit anything if you're doing that. So it does kind of like, I don't know, it does kind of make it feel a little bit more realistic, because it's a little bit less game-like almost. Yeah, sure, you could run and shoot in real life, but you probably wouldn't end up doing that if you want to hit the targets you're targeting. All right, well, I have some comments here for from some of our fans who had either questions or statements for us. So let's go ahead and go through a few of these real quick. So one of them, so Francisco is wondering, what is the definitive version of Resident Evil 4?
There's probably a few answers to this, but in my opinion, it's the Wii Edition.
Yeah.
The Wii Edition, it's basically the GameCube version in widescreen. It works with a GameCube controller if you prefer that control scheme, but the Wii Remote and Nunchuck are so good that they're almost too good. Like, you can play the game on Pro Mode pretty easily with the Wii Remote and Nunchuck, just because aiming is so quick and precise. So that might take away from the original, but if you prefer to play with the GameCube controller, you can do that too.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think it's super fun to play with the Wii Remote, and that's how my dad plays, and I think it's perfect for some people. But if you want the original experience, you have to play with the GameCube controller. That's what the entire game was based around and designed with in mind. And doing otherwise does change it. Not necessarily for the worse, but it probably does make it easier. So I agree. I think going with the original is the way to go. And by original, I mean the Wii version, which is basically the GameCube version with a few extra features if you want it. So Wii version with GameCube controller.
Yeah. It also has all the PS2 content.
Exactly, yeah, the Wii version has Separate Ways, and was Assignment Ada on the GameCube? I think Separate Ways is the main thing. Like, that's basically Ada's brand new campaign that runs parallel to the core campaign. And there are elements of Resident Evil 4's story where Separate Ways was clearly meant to be in there. Like this part where the bell rings at the beginning, and it's because Ada's ringing that bell. But if you play the GameCube version, you would never know that.
So, two things real quick. Before I get to something related to that point, I do want to mention too that the GameCube and Wii version still have some special effects that haven't been recreated in the other versions since. So as a purist, I kind of like that, even if it is running at a lower resolution. But also, I feel like the HD versions, it almost looks too clean to me. Like, it almost looks, I don't know, I like the gritty look of the kind of low-def version, and I feel like the HD version kind of takes away from that a little bit. Anyways, related to your point you just brought up, John, Michael J. Lozada asks, a question that comes to mind, are your guys' thoughts on the added content in the game with Separate Ways featuring Ada's role throughout the events of the game? So, I guess, yeah, just kind of wondering our general thoughts on it, and, I guess I'm not opposed to it, like, it is more Resident Evil 4 content, so that's a good thing. But for me, I thought Separate Ways and the other Ada thing were a huge step back from the main game itself, and like they're interesting as kind of like secondary content. But for me, I always go back to the original, and I don't even bother with the Ada missions.
Assignment Ada is pretty forgettable. Separate Ways was cool though, I felt. But I think the thing with Resident Evil 4 is there's so much extra content. Like you got the mercenaries, which you can spend hundreds of hours with. There's so many unlockable guns, there's all these unlockable modes. It's already a replayable game, but they just give you so much more to replay. And I can just replay over and over with different weapons. I love the unlockable stuff.
Yeah, and plus you have all the different costumes. And yeah, I enjoy the Ada stuff from like I guess lore portion, because I'm one of those dummies that really enjoy the Resident Evil story, just see what they're building towards next. And I guess seeing Wesker there, see Ada's kind of working with him. It's I don't know, I like it from that aspect. But you're right, it's a lesser version. You're more limited. It's meant to just be a side story. The true main draw is Leon's story, and most of the added questions that get answered, or most of the added stuff that gets answered, is not that integral.
It's not that integral, but I will say, and I'm probably alone in this, but I feel like it's answering questions I didn't really need or want answers to, and I feel like it removes a little bit of the mystery from the original experience. Like, it was kind of weird and creepy that the bell just started ringing seemingly by itself, but now that I know it's just Ada, it's like, it's not that interesting to me. I don't know.
I always thought it was actually the mayor, or the leader of the village.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I never really thought about all these other parts. I didn't think about why they happened. I just sort of accepted that there were answers.
I mean, I think that's it. Like, I think for me, like, I didn't think about it either, but like, it subtly added a little bit of a mystery to it that, you know, isn't something I consciously recognized, but I think I appreciated. Like, it added to the kind of vibe and lore, you know, the kind of just the overall vibe of the game. And I didn't need all that answered for me. And now the answer is always, well, Ada did it.
Yeah. There is one thing I don't like about Separate Ways, and that's that the cutscenes are pre-rendered in PlayStation 2 quality, no matter what version you play. So even in the HD version, you have these super low-res cutscenes, and they just don't look good.
That's not the case for the Wii version, though, right?
I think the Wii version still has PS2 cutscenes for Separate Ways.
Yeah, that was a little bit odd. I guess real quick, too, is, this game famously was announced as a GameCube exclusive, and the director even had a quote to the extent that he would cut off his head if it ever came to another system. And then I think before it even released, they announced that it was coming to the PS2. And to their credit, the port is pretty good. But if you want like the definitive version, the best possible experience, you have to go with either the GameCube or Wii version, because they did cut some effects. They had to redo some of the asset quality on the PS2 that does kind of like chip away a little bit at the overall experience.
Yeah, it kind of gets worse as it goes on. The original PC version is famously awful. The HD versions are fine. They're not worse than the PS2 version, but they're also not great. The GameCube and Wii ones they're still my favorite. They still look really good.
Would the Switch version have taken over if they had the gyro controls?
Maybe. I would have liked an option for the original textures, because they have updated them, just not to the same effect as the fan project. But yeah, if it had gyro, probably, yeah.
I have a question here from Drew Noble, who asks, or it's a statement rather, how you can't pet the dog.
Well, you can free the dog.
Exactly, that's way more important, right? If you were petting the dog, you would be doing a disservice to that poor little animal who needs to be freed from the trap. At which point you don't even have time to. It just runs off. You actually don't have time to pet it. So this is a perfectly sound reason for why you can't pet the dog in Resident Evil 4.
And like Leon lives in this world full of zombie dogs. He knows not to just go up to some strange dogs and pet them.
Exactly.
That is very true.
Harry Hoffert, who we already kind of addressed this a little bit, but I do kind of want to bring it up again. Do you think Capcom will remake Resident Evil 4 in the way they have 2 and 3? Personally, I don't think it is necessary, but at the same time, I think Capcom would jump at the opportunity to sell us Resident Evil 4 again. Because God knows they haven't enough already.
Yeah.
So we already talked about what we want them to do, but what do we think they actually will do? Because as you said earlier, John, after they're remaking Resident Evil 3, after that, it's gotta be 4, right? Like, where do you go from 3? I guess it could go to 0.
Yeah, or Code Veronica, maybe.
Or Code Veronica, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going to be one of those two games first. I think they know to stay away from Resident Evil 4 for a little bit. Maybe wait for technology to get even more advanced. So it's like, let's wait for this game to start not looking as good, so it feels better to do this remake, at least from a visual standpoint. But, you know, at the very least, we do have Zero and Code Veronica. In the meantime, they have to be working on a new Resident Evil, so I think we're still quite a few years out from them touching Resident Evil 4. That's a golden goose that they know they have to get just right, so I think they're going to wait a little bit.
Well, speaking of just right, like, what would you want them to see? What would you want them to do with this remake? I think we already talked about keeping the core gameplay there, but what do you think they could add to the game or enhance about the game to make it more quadruple dipping, whatever number comes after quadruple?
I don't even know. I'm gonna buy it regardless because I'm an idiot, but I don't know what they can do. I don't know if I even expect it to be like Resident Evil 2 and 3, because like the original Resident Evils, they got like four games in with Code Veronica and Zero, and they had to reboot the franchise because there was fatigue setting in. And I think that fatigue might already be coming in with Resident Evil 3 Remake. Like, it's very similar to 2 Remake. And we'll see when the game's out, of course. But they can't just keep redoing that same formula, because people will get tired again. And people got tired after Resident Evil 6. They're going to have to keep rebooting Resident Evil after every few games. So I do wonder if 4's going to even follow the same formula we have now.
That's a good question, but it kind of makes sense that 2 and 3 are so similar to each other because, well, that was the way they were to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but also, yeah, not fully sure what direction they go on. If they did Resident Evil 0, for example, I'd love to see them just take those two, like Becky and forget the other guy's name, just actually make that co-op.
Yeah, have a proper box management too. Like, you can fix 0 in so many ways, but
yeah, 0 and Code Veronica need fixing in a lot of ways. So to actually go back and do those, I think is way more important.
That's a good point. Yeah, fix a bad game rather than try and make another great game out of an already great game.
I mean, that's why, as I said earlier, like if they do revisit Resident Evil 4, I hope that they do keep the core intact and just upgrade more of the visuals and everything. But one thing I would like to see is I think it'd be cool if they actually added an even more difficult option to the game, like crank up, maybe crank up the enemy health or give them new AI routines. So just mix it up a little bit because we're all so familiar with this game now. I would love if they were able to slightly reinvent it in a way that seems fresh to us while still being the same core experience. So I think
what would be fun if to change up the enemies. You know how sometimes you can get the headshot and the parasite bursts out and you still have to fight it. I think it'd be really cool if like you could blow off their legs this time, and by the same idea, a parasite leg can come out and they can keep coming at you. To really find ways to mess with your head from what you know with, because I think that's your best bet for a Resident Evil 4 remake is kind of keep the ideas there, but really mess with the heads of people who have played this game hundreds of times by this point.
I like that, yeah. Also, QuickTime events. I don't want them.
Yeah.
If you're playing on Pro Mode and you're running away from that giant statue, they barely give you any time. Like, you've really got to hammer those buttons in. When I was playing through the Switch version again on Pro Mode, I had to like keep it my Switch in standby and just trying it again later because it was just so tricky to make those timings. They
did make, I think, most of that way easier in the Wii version just because of the motion controls. It's just way easier to like outrun boulders or all that for because you just have to shake it. So
yeah,
I didn't mind the QuickTime events, but I know some people really despise them. So
yeah, I think the main one that stands out is the Krauser fight when he's first introduced to Leon.
Oh god, I hate that fight.
There you go.
Yeah, it's like 10 minutes
That's probably
long,
the weakest
basically.
moment. It took me so long to get that right.
Alright, well those are most of the comments that stood out to me. Did any of them stand out to you guys? Did you have any things you wanted to bring up here, or?
I mean, we've already touched on a lot of these in our discussion, is the thing.
We have.
I think the main thing I just want to iterate on is how replayable this game is. I remember when I first picked up Resident Evil 4 and finished it and unlocked the mercenaries, my friend and I were playing the game parallel to each other. We'll just sort of play this game almost like a multiplayer way, where we'll just take turns on mercenaries and see who can get the highest score. It was just so fun to just continuously play, and you can get a real sense of mastery over this game. It's so easy just to pick up your favorite character mercenaries and just try and get as big as a combo as you can possibly get. Yeah, there's just so many like fun ways to play this game.
Yeah, I think my dad loves using the infinite rocket launcher and just running around blowing everyone away.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like you got that, you got the Chicago typewriter, you've got the giant ray gun. Yep. I remember when the Switch version came out, I got the I forgot.
Oh, isn't it like Plaga something or like
something like that? Yeah. So I posted a clip of myself using that and just taking like out everything on screen. And there was someone who replied saying, "I played this game back in the day, but after seeing all your clips, I don't feel like I've actually played it." It's just because there's so many like things to unlock, so many like different ways to play through the game again, that it does feel completely new each time.
Yeah, it almost. I'm comparing it to a few games now, but it almost felt a little bit Breath of the Wildish at the time, with how many options you had at any given moment. You can go through that village section in any number of ways. Like you don't have to trigger the chainsaw encounter if you don't grab the shotgun. It's just that's something I didn't even realize until quite some time later. Also, one other point I want to bring up real quick is this game had an awesome, and something I wasn't even realized at the time until like I think years later, because they didn't advertise it. It had, in fact, I don't think you even knew this, John, until I told you about it. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this game has like an auto-balancing difficulty system where if it can tell that you're having trouble, it'll make it easier. And it doesn't tell you this. It doesn't like make fun of you for failing over and over. It'll just like gradually remove enemies or give you more items that you need to help you get through it, and that is so cool. It keeps you moving throughout the game without feeling diminished, for failing at it.
Yeah, I had no idea about this. I was writing my episode of Under the Super Scope for this game, and you mentioned it. I don't know if it's actually in the European version though, because we have different difficulty settings. I forget exactly how the American version works, but in the European one, there's like easy mode, normal mode, hard mode, and pro mode. And I think the American one has like 2 of those cut out or something.
Right. Yeah, I think the core essence is still there though. I think the balancing was in every version, I believe.
But yeah. But like, if you keep dying, the enemies will gradually get easier for you, and that's a really cool thing. And it's great they didn't really advertise it too. It doesn't make you feel like you're like worse for losing at the game, because most people will never know.
I could just imagine that happening nowadays. People are like, they hid the fact that they're making the game easier on us. This is BS. How could they?
That's the genius of not revealing it, because no one can get mad because no one knew it existed. The only time I remember noticing it, I think, and I can't even say if I noticed it or if I just heard about it later, but I'm pretty sure I noticed it, was I was in the hallway with the 2 blind guys. I was getting wrecked by them over and over and over, and at some point they just remove one of the blind guys, and it gets way easier when they do that. So I'm like, oh, that's cool. That's handy. So yeah. All right, guys. Any final thoughts about Resident Evil 4 you want to get out there before we wrap it up?
It's such a brilliant game. It could really be easily put out there as one of the best games of all time. And I don't think that's hyperbole either.
It's not.
No. No, I mean, there's so much I want to say about this game, and I don't want to keep this too long, though. So.
Yeah, it's already gone longer than I think we expected, so...
I just want to say, I love this game, and if you've not played it before, you have to. We've sold a lot of people on this game, I think. Like, we're always getting tweets saying, like, oh, I've just bought Resident Evil 4, and people still love it. It's just a testament to how good this game is, that people in 2020 can pick up a game from 2005 and still have a great time with it.
Yeah, and I would suggest, like, if you're turned off at first by the controls, just give it a little bit more time. Like, they do take some getting used to. It is going to be a little bit more limited than you may be accustomed to from more recent action games, or even action horror or survival horror games even. But definitely stick with it and appreciate that it was designed. It was very intentionally designed that way. It's not a limitation. It's what the gameplay hinges around. It's a gameplay mechanic. And once you lean into that and understand like what the game's asking of you, that's when it really comes alive. So sure. Yeah, I highly recommend you play this game or replay it if you haven't revisited it in some way, or in some time. All right, and with that, I think we're about done here. So thank you so much for watching, and of course, stay tuned to Game Explain for future Resident Evil 4 discussions and everything else Nintendo as well. We'll catch you later.
Every 5 years.
We can only hope. Bye.